Mike is a seasoned entrepreneur. He'll talk to us probably more about that later. He's founded a lot of startups. A lot of his startups became IPOs. He's been around the block quite a bit with startups, but he's also probably one of those professors that teaches in more of the Ivy League schools than you can imagine. He teaches at MIT, he teaches at Harvard, he teaches at Brown. Now he's teaching at IE. Mike is a member of the Applied Innovation Institute with myself. So we do programs around the world, and it's a pleasure to work with him. Mike has run over 200 hackathons around the world. 200 hackathons. That is a big, big one. He's very, close to the VC community. He teaches leadership. Last time I think I told you guys we were together in Chennai, teaching leadership to Stellantis. And Mike later on helped teach them generative AI for sales. So he'll talk more about that. And here's Iklak.
I'm here.
I was just introducing Mike. Iklak.
Yeah.
And,
Hola, Iklak.
Hello.
Hola.
Yeah. Hi. Good to see you.
Did I miss anything on the introduction, Mike?
Yeah, that's great, Paris. Thank you so much. Awesome.
All right.
Other than you and I like to, enjoy life together, but that's the most important thing. So anyway, very nice introduction. Thank you so much.
Hold on, Mike.
Just 1 minute before you start.
You bet.
So first, let me also take a minute and thank you for dialing in from Boston and being part of it and all that. And all I wanted to do is I want to take like 1 minute and just kind of talk about what's going to happen for the next kind of like segment here. So I think you already somewhat know because you have an agenda, but but the idea is that for this next hour, we're going to basically have like kind of switch from the business perspective to a user perspective, design thinking kind of perspective. Then at 4 o'clock, it's going to go into like, it's getting progressively more technical as we go. So at 4 o'clock, it'll be more on really like web app development, React, or, like this type of thing. There is a chance that depending on your background, we're gonna like lose you in that next section. For some people, it's gonna be like piece of cake, nothing, like you've been doing this all the time. For some people are like, why am I watching this? Or whatever. But I'm gonna say just stay with it. And it's good. And like we're trying to do it in a way that like if you're very technical, no problem, you can just use it right off the top. If you're medium technical, like you can pull pieces, you can do things with it. If you're not at all, you get a sense of like what people are working with. So I think it's good all the way around. And then the session after that is basically on the OpenAI primer. So like, I'm just kind of setting it all up. At the end of that, we'll just try to get everyone together to formulate like what they're gonna like put together, like integrate their slides with whatever the story is on the business side, with whatever they can write code, whatever they can demo, whatever first version of something that you can show technical, right? We're gonna try to figure out what that can be, and we're gonna basically give you till tomorrow, Friday, to put those two together. So this kind of goes through the lessons here, and then after that, it's like 24 hours is basically like try to put it together, right? Okay, so now you got a preview of what's going to happen. Even Mike, you have a preview of what's going to happen through this little discussion, and I'm going to hand it all back to you now. Okay.
All right. Thank you. And first of all, I just want to thank Iklak and Paris for inviting me. It's always been a joy to collaborate with both of them across a lot of different types of activities. And one of the things we share a passion for is experiential education. So for you to be a part of this boot camp is an amazing growth opportunity, and I just urge you all to take full advantage of it. So, what you're being asked to do is you're being asked to create something, okay? And one of the things that's remarkable when you come together in a group like this, in a boot camp or a hackathon or design sprint, is you all have this profound ability to influence one another, right? Your creative effort inspires others around you, and their creative effort inspires you. So just surrender to the experience of being in a creative community, because it's a very, very satisfying experience to be a part of, which is why I've done so many hackathons. Okay, so I've had 4 separate careers. I started off as an engineer in Silicon Valley. After business school, I worked at McKinsey. I had the opportunity to help co-found 8 tech startups. And then I've been teaching at a bunch of universities whose badges are here on the screen. And the one thing I will say, I am not a designer, but 7 of my 8 startups have been successful. 2 have been gone public. 7 of 8 were acquired. And I attribute a lot of it directly to the use of human-centric design. When you compete with technology companies that lead with, the features and functions and capabilities and don't take into account the customer experience, it's an unfair competitive advantage. It's especially relevant today in the AI space, which is so crowded. So here's my agenda. It's a bit ambitious, but we'll get through it. I want to talk about why design matters. I want to talk about today's innovation challenge, especially within the generative AI space. What is the mindset that you need to bring to your venture? It's a human-centric mindset. What is that methodology? How team dynamics play a critical role. I might just comment briefly on AI hardware versus software, because there's a lot of new devices that are being created. I don't know how many saw the jaw-dropping Rabbit R1 demo at the Consumer Electronics Show. I'm anxiously awaiting mine to arrive. Apparently, it's going to ship the 21st of April, not surprisingly behind schedule. And then finally, design sprints. And so Angela had sent you maybe moments ago an email that I had put together. And we're only going to spend a few minutes on design sprints, but I created 2 videos, very short videos that talk about what a design sprint is. And although you're not using a design sprint process today, I think it's just good background to have for the future. Very, very powerful 4-day experience that allows you to accomplish something in just a remarkably compressed time. So why are you guys here? Why are you women here today, right? You all have a dream. You all want to create the next great tech venture. And as we all know, right, if we go back to my good friend Niccolo Machiavelli, right, there's nothing more difficult to undertake than to change the order of things. We all know the odds of success of startups. And so, your job is, you want to think big, you want to have a vision of how you're going to have a significant impact and reframe the way that the world does something. But you've got to start small. You've got to be super focused. And, and over time, you can realize that dream, but you have to realize that dream one disciplined step at a time. Now, many of you must have heard of Peter Thiel, PayPal CEO, one of the first Facebook and Twitter investors, insanely successful and respected Silicon Valley executive with just a disproportionate amount of influence. And I love that Thiel understands how important it is for entrepreneurs to be designers. Okay. What you may or may not know, because a lot of you are too young to know the history, but the firm known as IDEO had a tremendous impact on the success of Apple. If you ever have a chance to see the 60 Minutes interview with David Kelly, David was one of the founders of IDEO. He also happened to be Steve Jobs' best friend and his best man at the wedding. And no one has done more to bring human-centric design into the common consciousness in the commercial world than Kelly. And Kelly and Jobs were constantly in discussion. And so much of the design-centric philosophy we're going to talk about today was really pioneered in the commercial world by Apple. And that is why they remain, the second most valuable company in the world today, so many decades after their founding. Very few hardware startups, get to scale like Apple and stick around for generations. And design is at the very heart of what has been the secret to Apple's success. And of course, the media now understands the importance of design, right? I don't know how many of you read Fast Company, one of my favorite publications on the innovation economy. And it's just an indication that more and more people in the tech world recognize the criticality of bringing a designer into any technical team that's working on a next generation innovative product. So here's the challenge you face, guys. And this is where I'm going to bridge from the business discussion of yesterday to the design thinking mindset. AI is like water. Now, why do I say that? Let's look at the Y Combinator Winter 2024 cohort that is up and running as we speak. 71% of the companies, or 160 of the 220 startups within the Y Combinator cohort right now, are working on generative AI startups. 71%. Recently, I was at the Harvard Business School's annual venture capital conference. By far, the single most attended session was on generative AI. You can only imagine how many students are doing exactly what you're thinking about right now, taking a Gen AI startup into the marketplace, okay? And so here's the challenge, right? And look into the blue box, right? We're seeing this generational shift of applied AI, and it's tasks that used to take 5 years, and a research team in 2013 requires some API docs in a spare afternoon, and you can create something. And so what are the challenges, right? So I've sat on a lot of VC panels over the last year on generative AI. Here's what they're saying. They've looked at thousands of companies, thousands of business pitches on the application layer. And many of them, most of them are exactly the same when you open the hood, right? If you're only going to differentiate yourself on data and model, it's not going to work, right? And so the challenge, of course, is this is an area where incumbents have probably the biggest advantage they've had since I've been doing startups 30 years ago, right? Because they have access to data that you just can't. So unless you have unique access to data that no one else does, you're going up against people that have data that they've been accumulating for generations, okay? And as we're seeing, right, the model war, the horse race between OpenAI and Google Gemini and Mistral in France and Cohere and Anthropic, right? You're going to start seeing more and more interchangeable models. And so what does that mean, right? This is what you don't want to be. If you're going to put your time and energy and your heart and passion into a venture, you don't want to be a commodity. And so here's what's amazing, right? And it's not that money is going to help you. This was a remarkable thing that happened literally 2 weeks ago. You may or may not recognize some of the people in this photo, but a company known as Inflection AI was co-founded by none other than Reid Hoffman, the gentleman on the left with the glasses, who, oh, by the way, was one of the early executives at PayPal, the founder of LinkedIn, a very successful venture capitalist in Silicon Valley with Greylock. And then on the right, Mustafa Suleyman, who was one of the leading brains at Google Mind, the world's leading AI research institute. They had raised billions of dollars at a staggering valuation. And literally 2 weeks ago, they decided they could not compete. And they more or less did an acqui-hire where Suleyman is now running all of consumer AI for Microsoft. He was hired by Nadella. And to see a company with these pedigreed founders in this insane amount of capital just deciding to wave the white flag was a real indication of just how challenging this space can be. And then one last example, some of you may know Stability AI. It was headquartered in London. And they had raised a staggering amount of money in their Series A, and they were the belle of the ball about a year ago. but they've been competing with Midjourney and OpenAI DALL-E, and the CEO just stepped down, and this company is in deep trouble. So it's not, money itself is not going to save you. It's got to be insight that's going to save you, right? So the question is, how do you build a moat, a defensible competitive advantage around your specific venture? Okay. And here's a little bit of history that might help, right? You know, Icklock and Paris and I are all old enough, and some of your professors are all old enough to have seen technology going from the shiny new thing to a commodity. Okay, it happens all the time. Usually it takes a while, right? So if you think about the world of biology, right? The original, you know, early on, sequencing the genome was a profoundly unique thing to be able to do and remarkably expensive, but the cost had plummeted to now where it's just a commodity. And so no company in the tech bio space is using genome sequencing as their core differentiator, as their special sauce, right? They're taking that foundational technology and then they're adding additional value to solve problems, right? And the challenge with generative AI is, you know, at the genesis of Gen AI, we already got to the $100 genome sequence, right? We already got to this point of commoditization, right? So the question for all of you in the room is, how do you deliver value outside of the AI solution and potentially, you know, layer it on, integrate it in at some point later? And if you actually take AI out of your pitch deck, right, is it still a good business? Is there still value? Is there still something that you're creating that users will want? And so now the question then is, you know, what are business moats and how do we identify them? And I'm going to skip this over and say that the winning formula, right, is the data plus the model, because you are working in the AI space. But you need to really understand the user experience in a deeply profound way. And you've got to also understand how you might be able to distribute your capability, probably through incumbents, meaning that there's got to be some value add on top of the incumbent foundations. And along with that perceived value to customers, that is your MVP today. So it's not just about the technology, right? UX, distribution are going to be critical, and certainly brand. So now let's switch into the mindset. This is now the design thinking mindset, okay, that I would love all of you to bring into this boot camp. This is not what we're talking about. This is the antithesis of design thinking, right? Sitting in a small conference room with no windows and just believing that you've got a bright idea and beginning to code is the absolute opposite of the approach. So many of you, I would imagine, know Y Combinator. You may or may not know Paul Graham, but he keeps it pretty simple. This is the first commandment: make something people want. Sounds so easy, not so easy to do. Okay. And so I have the privilege of being a judge in the MIT CIO Leadership Awards. And I just had the opportunity to read 50 different applications. Okay. And this is an older version of the imagery. But, you know, I just read 50 applications from some of the top CIOs in the world. There's not a single CIO that has not put, you know, the ability to put generative AI into the core of their business. So there is no question that the demand is there, right? There is a huge opportunity to create value and bring that into the enterprise, right? I'm not talking about consumer apps now. I'm talking about enterprise apps specifically. So it's not as if the opportunity does not exist. So part of the mindset is about value. I don't know how many of you have seen this Bain & Company graphic, which is showing the value pyramid both into the B2C and the B2B space. But you don't want to be operating at the bottom of the value pyramid. You really want to be operating toward the middle or the higher end, right? Where the value is far more significant and where the margins are going to be far more significant and where you've got real differentiation. One of the standard constructs from human-centric design is, right, as we build a tech venture, there are these three separate dimensions, all of which are critical, but we start with desirability. It doesn't matter if we have technology that is feasible and if we can build a viable business model. What we got to focus on first is, in the words of Paul Graham, are we building something people want? So you're going to have to reach out to people in the ecosystem to make sure that what you're building is something that they want. Okay. And we're not selling to a business. A business is not a human being, right? There's no such thing as a business to business or a business to consumer mindset. It's a human to human mindset. You're designing for other human beings. And the core of it is to have empathy, right? To understand what is important, what bottlenecks your users are facing, what jobs they want to get done, but they're not able to get done efficiently, or they're not able to get done in a timely manner, or it's just there's too much friction in the process, or it's too expensive. How do you start to identify some of those obstacles and gaps and points of friction, and help them be more successful in what they do? Okay. And so this may or may not hold in Europe, but of course, in Silicon Valley, in the US, the ability to run experiments, constantly run experiments with the understanding that you are going to fail, but you're not going to be a failure. You are going to learn. This is a experimental experience, and it's all about learning both what does and doesn't work, and you double down on what does work. Okay. And at some point, you are moving toward a minimum viable product. And the minimum viable product is something that has to solve that core problem. It's got to have something really tangible that addresses a user need. So these are some of the mindsets. And now let's get into the methodology. And let me stop here, okay? Because I've been moving quickly. Let me just stop and pause for some questions or some comments. Or does Iklok or Paris or some of the other faculty in the room want to layer on anything that I've talked about so far? Okay, I'm going to keep moving then. So although this is not a design thinking artifact, I would hope that most of you are familiar with something called the lean value canvas. The lean value canvas is really at the core of lean startup methodology. And I only want to bring it up because it's an incredibly valuable complement to the design thinking methodology that we're going to go through. And the reason it's important is because what the lean value canvas focuses on is problem solution fit. If you have not identified a real problem, right? Does someone care? And you have not been able to demonstrate how the solution addresses the problem, you don't go forward. So this is really a prism to cause you to continue to think about problem solution fit. But now let's talk about design in a human-centered way. So as you see in the upper right, the three circles that I described earlier, okay? And specifically what we're focusing on in the center of the design thinking process is desirability. We can get to the viability and the feasibility later. On the left-hand side, we have another three circles. And those three circles are all about, the human context. What are the user's motivations? What is the culture that we are going into? Is it a corporate culture? Is it a studio culture? Is it a European culture? Is it an Asian culture? Right? All of those things help inform how we're going to create some unique advantage and satisfy human needs. And then we have this classic iterative process in the center, which we go from empathy to definition to ideation to prototyping and test. And all of this comes from the world-class design consultancy known as IDEO. And again, as I mentioned, this was the company that was really a very important part of the success of Apple. Okay. And so you have access to the IDEO design kit. IDEO is incredibly valuable as a resource for you. And there's a lot of artifacts, including journey maps and persona maps. that are incredibly useful for you, and they're available for free. And I would encourage at least one member of the team to become very familiar with the IDEO Design Kit and some of the other IDEO thought leadership content that they have on the site. Okay. If I was to put design centricity into a simple slide, it's kind of like Sesame Street. It's brought to you by the letter E. And so that means, one, deep empathy, which has to inform everything you do, but certainly the discovery work. You're running a series of experiments and you're learning from those experiments. And and you're gathering evidence from those experiments that cause you to then go back and go through this iterative cycle until you get to problem solution fit. And so the process, as it's laid out in the IDEO methodology, although this is laid out in a linear fashion, as we saw before, it's really a very cyclical, iterative process. So empathy, gather information, and more importantly, inspiration from interviews. Okay, go out and talk to users or prospective users, get firsthand experience about what they're doing and what they're struggling with. And here's the hardest thing, especially for engineers who want to problem solve. You don't go out to tell them how awesome your idea is. You need to really focus on listening and listening more. There's plenty of time to come back and talk about your solution later. And I've been teaching design courses at the master's level for 20 years. And I can tell you, as many times as I tell my students, please do not talk about your solution. And then I go out and I observe them. They start talking about their solution in the first 30 seconds. Okay. So this is all about listening and learning. Later, you can talk about your solution. Once you have gathered all of that information, right, you come home to your co-working space or your dorm room or your apartment or wherever you're working, the venture lab. And now you are synthesizing that everything that you have learned in these interviews, in this discovery work. And you're beginning as a team to narrow down those insights, those observations. And for the first time, really trying to define the problem, which is a very challenging thing to do, right? To really say, okay, I think we've identified a true problem, and we feel that there's a lot of emotional resonance, that this problem is causing discomfort or pain to the user. Let's agree that this is in fact the problem that we have identified. And then beginning to, on the third phase, let's now begin to ideate on what solutions may be able to address that problem in some very unique way with some kind of competitive advantage that no one is doing today. Okay? And then, just as Iklok had mentioned just before I came on, right, you need to quickly reduce it to something physical, a prototype, right? It's called thinking with your hands. And the importance of a prototype is that it removes ambiguity, right? Because we can be speaking in English or Spanish or whatever language we speak in, and I might say something and you might interpret it very, very differently from what I say, right? Based on your own lens, your own experience, your own history. A prototype allows you to truly understand precisely what we were talking about. So a lot of times the rubber hits the road on the prototype, because this is where differences of perspective or differences in understanding really get visible. And then you put that prototype into the hands of your users. And once again, you keep your mouth shut and you let them play with the new, device, the new application, and you watch them struggle with it, because they're going to struggle with it the first time. And you start to see how they're actually going to be able to interact with it. Okay. And this is a very powerful experience. And a lot of people will be tempted to say, no, do it this way, or that's not what I intended. So you've got to really have a lot of just serenity about surrendering to the process and letting them decide what works and what doesn't, and then come back and let you know, and have the humility to accept that feedback. Nobody wants to be told that their baby is ugly, but it's much better to know that early. than late. Okay. And so let me just ask people in the room, right? You're about to embark on this, it's now the day 2. So you've got 5 days of intensive work. How many of you have been out talking to users about your potential invention? How much of that work has happened so far? So you can shout out. I'm from New York. I'm used to being shouted at. Okay. So I saw a hand go up. So the gentleman who had the hand up, what you said that you've been talking to users. So can you describe how you've been going about that process?
Yeah, which way should I look? Where's the camera?
The
camera.
under the screen.
All right, amazing. So we've been reaching out to a lot of people on, first of all, on both feasibility and the use cases.
Yeah.
So we've been reaching out to some politicians, to some investors, to some people who have some activity in media.
Yeah.
And how they perceive the opportunity of being watched and controlled, like on a tech side.
Okay, and let me ask you, what's the most interesting thing that you learned in all of these discussions? What's like the key takeaway that you're going to use to inform what you do in this boot camp? Anything really jump out at you?
Accessibility.
Accessibility.
Yeah.
Okay, say a little bit more. What does that mean? How does that manifest in your product to make it accessible? What's that look like?
Well, to make accessible being very easy to use, so something happens.
Sorry, continue.
Oh, it's fine.
Sorry.
Being very simple to use. So we're thinking about building just an extension for the website. So it's like the most simple way for people to use.
That's great. Thank you. What's your name?
Yeah.
Thank you. Just maybe one more person. Can you share what you've learned from your market discovery work so far?
Well, personally, so I've been like exploring, so talking to customers about the pain that, I personally, like the idea comes from my personal pain in like wasting a lot of time applying to jobs and internships.
Yeah.
So even before this bootcamp, I already had like started talking to customers, and mainly like my question is in regards to how to build a solution. I don't know if it's a problem that has a solution or if it's just like a structural problem. So I don't know if you have any insight in regards to how to identify whether something can be solved or is it just like a structural problem?
Well, I mean, so first of all, as a student and as a professor on this side, I've seen many, many, many students over the years bring exactly this kind of problem into my, new venture classes, right? It's obviously a classic problem. And listen, there's a solution to every problem, right? And that's really the whole purpose of this boot camp, is to have you begin to work with your team to start to ideate on what some solutions will be, right? And remember, no one's, until about a year ago, no one's really had the ability to use generative AI as part of the solution, right? So it opens up an entirely new frontier of ways to solve this problem that were never available before. So I'm always an optimist. I always believe if there's a will, there's a way. And if you are really passionate about solving this problem and the team that you're working with is passionate, you're going to figure it out, right? Doesn't mean you're going to figure it out by the end of the week, but you're going to get a heck of a head start on thinking about what it's going to look like, right? That's why you're here this week.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, the thing I also want you guys to understand is that when a user tells you something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And that doesn't mean that they're lying to you. And so one of my friends is a partner at IDEO, and he says something that's very, very common. People don't do what they say they do. They don't do what we think they're going to do, and they don't even do what they think they're going to do, right? We are irrational beings. And so, and especially in the world of technology, right? And I'm going around the world now teaching AI courses to executives. And I'm realizing that very few of them are actually using these tools. And so they may not really fully understand what it is that's, that's state of the art today. And so they may tell you that they want some things, but it's based on a lack of understanding of what's possible. So you have to balance out what they tell you with their actions and really take the time to say, okay, I hear you, but you know, when I spend time with your people, right, that's not what's happening. So there's got to be a balance between what you observe with your eyes and what you hear with your ears. And they both supplement one another. Now, one way to really get breakthrough ideas is by observing an extreme user. Now, what does that mean? An extreme user, you know, is someone that's kind of, you know, two standards of deviation from the center, right? And so you have, in a very simple example, you have children and you have people that are disabled. So here's a really interesting example. We all know what this is, right? It's a defibrillator, and it's meant for, you know, helping someone going through cardiac arrest. These have always been very complex devices. And one of the challenges has been when these have been made available in public places like airports and train stations and athletic facilities, is that they were so complex that when someone was trying to save a loved one or a friend by using one, they didn't know how to use it. And so it was there, but it was not accessible, in the words of my friend from a moment ago. And so what IDEO did is they worked with Philips, a name I'm sure you all know well from Holland. And what they said is, you know, we're going to test this device with 5-year-old kids. And if a 5-year-old child knows how to use a defibrillator without any instruction, by making it so simple that we know that anybody going through a very, very stressful experience where someone is having a cardiac episode should be able to use it, right? So this is just a very simple but very powerful example of, you know, allowing people without a lot of sophistication, 5-year-old kids, to help you define a very simple to use, very accessible device. Here's another example. I'm sure a lot of you are probably F1 fans, right? It used to be 20 years ago, it took 67 seconds for an F1 car to go through a pit stop, 67 seconds. Today, they have reduced that to 2 seconds. Okay, just think about that improvement. It's remarkable. But the reason I share this example with you is because a lot of other industries are looking at Formula One pit crews and pit stops. One of the ones you may not recognize is the favored airline in of poor students in Europe is Ryanair. Ryanair actually studied Formula One pit crews, right? They turned their planes around in 15 minutes. Most airlines, it takes them an hour and a half to turn their planes around. So Ryanair is able to, you know, get more flights out of their planes. They get 3 more flights a day out of each of their planes. It's why they're the most profitable airline in the world year after year, right? And they were inspired by looking at Formula One pit stops. So sometimes you can cross-pollinate ideas and bring them into your own design and establish an incredible competitive advantage, okay? So now you've been in the market, you've talked to customers, you've had, you know, users, let's call them users, let's call them stakeholders. You've spoken with them, you've observed them in their own natural habitat. And now what you're doing is you're bringing those observations back to your team. Okay. Now, what is the average size of the team in the boot camp this week? How many people are working in, you know, per team? Is it a set amount or does it vary?
It's like 4 and 5. 4
Okay.
and 5.
So you have the ability to divide and conquer, right? So you can go off and you can all have different discussions, maybe with different types of stakeholders, different industries, right? And you come back and you teach one another, okay? And so there's got to be a lot of time where you're educating one another on what you've learned and you're synthesizing all of those insights. And, you know, there comes a point where you go from a lot of ideas where you've all interviewed a number of people and you have a lot of ideas. And so it's what we call divergent thinking, right? Where you really want to look at everything, right? And no idea is a bad idea. But at some point, the team needs to start to think about converging on a few of your very best ideas. Those ideas that you think have the most promise, that connect most to the challenges and the friction points that you've heard about from your users, right? Because that's what you're going to wind up reducing to your prototype, okay? And exactly as Iklok requested, right? You want to be able to do rapid iterative prototyping, okay? And it can be something as simple, of course, and you know, not in this context, in this boot camp, you're going to be writing code, of course, right? But you know, in other hackathons where maybe people didn't have the same kind of technical skills that many of you in the room have, those prototypes could be paper prototypes, okay? And of course, on the left-hand side, we see a series of screens that somebody would be navigating. And it's a great way to make sure that you all understand the way that a user is going to experience your application, okay? And then one way to tell to prototype is to tell a story. And I know that in Iklok's book, you know, Innovation Engineering, you know, there's a lot of really rich content there around the importance of storytelling. And that's a very, very important part of this process, okay? So I would hope that every team has someone that is a natural storyteller, because that story is something that you use to get feedback. And if people don't understand the story, or they don't agree with the way that the story is being told, or they begin to question whether what you're working on is really viable, or whether what you're working on is something that's going to satisfy their needs, that in and of itself is a prototype, because that is something that is allowing you to generate real feedback from your stakeholders, from your users, okay? And so how do we work in teams? Right. And I don't know, right? I've often seen in my student teams that, you know, one student has the idea and everyone else kind of sits back and listens, right? And everybody's kind of working in service of the person who had the idea, right? And it's great that someone brought an idea to the table, but we need to all feel like we have the ability to bring a voice and to contribute, okay? And so, you know, the acronym, together everyone achieves more. So the only way that this is going to be a great learning experience is if everybody on the team fully leans in. If you're in a real startup, trust me, if you're not leaning in, you're not going to be in that startup very long. And so one of the questions you may want to ask yourselves as a team is what role each of you will play. Is there some explicit strength or explicit superpower that each of you has that you bring to the team? And then you are sort of the champion around that strength or that superpower, but others are complementing you. Because remember, if there's only 4 or 5 of you, right, there's an immense amount of work to derive these insights. So you all want to be, you know, firing on all cylinders, okay? And so one of the, you know, one of the commonly held ways that people hire in US startups is you have sort of this holy trinity. You have the hustler, and the hustler is the commercial person, right? The person, you might call them the CEO or the president, but they're the person who is market facing. They're the ones that are out there speaking with customers. They're the ones who are out there potentially speaking with strategic partners, with investors. Of course, you have the hacker, right? You have the technology expert who is, you know, coding for you, architecting for you. And increasingly, the third founder is the designer, right? And so you want to make sure that the people on your team are bringing unique capabilities. And if you don't have people like this on your team, then you're probably going to want to pretty quickly see if you can't bring someone else into your team that can fulfill one of these roles, right? The last thing we want to have is, you know, only 5 engineers on a team or 5, you know, MBAs, right? That just doesn't work. You need cognitive diversity, okay? And if I go back to the great Zen master Phil Jackson, the guy that led both Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant to 6 NBA championships east, I love this quote: "The strength of the team is each individual member. The strength of each member is the team." And so how do we think about our purpose now, right? What does the innovation process really look like, right? So on the left-hand side, are you willing? On the right-hand side, are you able? And I would hope that each team has created or aligned around a sense of purpose, a sense of values, right? And this, you know, as engineers, this may not necessarily completely resonate with you, if you haven't had a lot of professional experience, but you will have so much more effectiveness if you agree on the purpose of this team and what your values are and what your rules of engagement are, how you're going to work together, how you're going to respect each other, how you're going to treat each other, okay, how you're going to give feedback to each other, how you're going to hold each other accountable, right? You're building your own little community, okay? And so I would say that you should invest some time in that, right? This is not a nice to, this is a must if you want to be effective. I see the teams in my own courses who do this always outperform those who just assume, hey, everything's going to be just fine. We'll figure it out later. And those are the teams that have, team dynamic issues that I have to intervene in, okay? On the right-hand side is there's going to be some level of creative abrasion. And what that means is you're going to have differences of opinion. And that's a good thing, right? We don't want all of you just completely being in agreement, right? If you're going to really care about solving this problem, you're going to have a lot of passion around it. And because we're bringing cognitive diversity and experiential diversity to the team, we're going to have different perspectives on how we're going to do that. And that is very, very healthy, okay? But at some point, because we're under time pressure, we're going to have to resolve those issues. And so the team is going to need to go back to those rules of engagement and figure out how you're going to get to some level of alignment and resolution around the path forward, okay? And then this is now going to go back to the email that you should have received by now from Angela. And this is what a design sprint is. So let me just try to explain 3 differences. And this is also in the email. What I've described to you over the last 45 minutes or so is a mindset, okay? And is there a methodology? There is, but it's very much a mindset. Design thinking is about a unique way, a very human-centric way of thinking to solve problems creatively. A design sprint, which was originated by Google and the Google Venture Group, is much more of a very strict process. It's now a 4-day process and is a step-by-step method for testing and validating new ideas, okay? And it's amazing what you can do in 4 days when you're using a design sprint once you've had the opportunity to do some market discovery work. Now, for those of you in the room who are engineering students, obviously you know what an agile sprint is, right? And that is both a framework and a working method that enables iterative and incremental product development on an ongoing basis. So I just want to give you the opportunity to draw some distinctions between what is design thinking, which is the primary focus of my talk today, what a design sprint could do for you in the future. And this is something you may want to bring with you forward out of the boot camp if you really want to get things done quickly, okay? And so design sprint and is structured decision-making, and you'll see 2 videos that I created using the tool known as Doodly, but let me just take you through, this very, very basically, and then just open it up for questions to keep you guys on time, right? The design sprint is always going to have a team and roles. Now, in your instance, you don't have a VP because you're students, but you are going to have, again, people that are very specific, doing very specific types of roles. So someone, of course, is going to be the commercial person that's going to own bringing in user input. You're going to have the hustler or the creator, the designer. And if you don't have one, you should definitely find somebody to help you with that. You're going to have the coder or the developer. You're going to have, ideally, a customer expert. And ideally, if you can, have someone facilitate the design sprint, because there's a lot of, moving parts here. And so can you have someone who is not within the group, who's not wed to the product, that can be very independent, very objective, and can kind of help you step through this process in a timely fashion, okay? And then what does it look like? On Monday, you've made a decision on, you're mapping what the problem is, you're sketching what you think are potential solutions. On the Tuesday of that week, you are deciding on a very specific solution that you want to build. You're starting to storyboard out what that solution will look like. On Wednesday, you are building the prototype. And on Thursday, you are testing that prototype with your stakeholders and users. And you're gathering feedback and you are recapping, you are synthesizing, you're doing sort of a postmortem. And, that will then inform you in terms of, do we want to repeat this process again next week or next month? And use those insights. And I have seen miracles done in 4-day design sprints. I've seen things that people have struggled to get done for years because they were working in environments that just didn't let them focus. And then 4 days, they cracked the code. So this is a very powerful methodology. Okay. And so, I want to end on this quote, right? I want to give you all credit for, being in this process, right? You are people who are not just dreaming, but you're putting your intention into action. Okay. And so there's nothing more exciting than having the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to band up with a group of fellow colleagues. We have a passion around solving technical problems together. And now you have the ability to go do it. So I wish you guys all a lot of success with this process. I can't wait to hear what comes up. And hopefully I'll be in Madrid and I'll meet some of you in the Venture Lab later this summer. So with that, let me just answer questions or clarify anything that I've said. Please don't be shy.
At which point would you say you have to decide that the venture you want to go forward with is just not going to work?
I wish I could give you a silver bullet answer. So there's a balance, right? On the one hand, if you really care about the venture, right? If you really care about solving the problem, you're going to be able to withstand a lot of, tough feedback, tough criticism. And you're committed to finding a way. And I'll give you an example of that. So there's a young woman who was a mentee of mine in the Techstars Accelerator, and she was South Korean by birth, but she came to America to study engineering and design. And she cared deeply about diabetes because her grandfather died of diabetes one night in his sleep when she was 9 years old. And when she wound up in the Techstars Accelerator, she was hell-bent on addressing some element of diabetes. And what she ultimately decided to do with a lot of our mentorship was to focus on young kids with severe diabetes. And she came up with the idea of a medical robot in the form of a cuddly teddy bear called Jerry the Bear. She actually went through 33 prototypes before she got it right. 33. That is an insanely relentless approach. But she got it right. And the company has scaled, and they've now created medical robots for children with cancer, food allergies, asthma, all kinds of chronic illnesses. But it happened because she cared so deeply about making it successful that nothing was going to stop her. Now, in retrospect, it's great that she found a way to get there after 33 prototypes, living on ramen noodles and, and peanut butter. And so at some point, it comes down to the judgment and conviction of the founding team. If you remain committed to solving the problem, you keep going. Now, there may come a point where you just don't have the financial ability to do that anymore, right? You may have run out of time, you may have run out of funds and resources, and you just can't get it done. But these become, very, very personal decisions. On the other hand, if you're just doing this because, you want to see what it's like to run a startup and you're not all that invested in the success or solving the problem of the startup, inevitably you're going to hit a roadblock, a speed bump. And a lot of people that are not emotionally committed to solving the problem are they're going to bail out. They're going to say, this is not really, what I want to put a lot of my time into. Okay. So you'll get a lot of feedback from a lot of other people, but, ultimately as the founders of a company, it's your decision as to how far you want to take it and how resourceful you want to be.
Thanks. All right, any more questions? We got another one here.
Do you have any suggestions on how to pick a team? How to pick co-founders? people to work?
Absolutely. So first, of course, is that cognitive diversity, right? That hacker, hustler, designer mindset, right? You don't want to have like, for many years I judged in the MIT entrepreneurship competition. And you'd have 5 MIT PhDs show up as a team, right? I don't care how smart they are. That's just not a good team. There's no diversity there. So first is, of course, you want to make sure that you understand what values and what purpose you are bringing to the startup. Okay. And then you are recruiting people that are going to align with your sense of purpose and your values. You might care about solving an environmental problem. You may care about solving an education problem. You may care about solving a health or medical problem, right? And so you're going to stand for that. And you're going to want to find other people that also stand for that. So there's an alignment of purpose and values. And then secondly, you're going to be looking for people that fill out those different roles on the team that complement one another. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to start to work together and see if that person's work ethic holds up its end of the bargain. Okay. So these are all very, very important decisions, right? You can't rush into, having a founder. You've got to really get to know them. You got to hang out with them. You got to drink beers with them. You've got to do stuff with them to make sure that, there's a level of alignment. And there's a book I'd like to recommend to you. And it's called Founders Dilemmas. Founders Dilemmas was written by a former Harvard Business School professor named Noah Wasserman, Wasserman. And it's a book that was based on interviews with 5,000 founding teams. It's an incredible resource. Now, if you don't want to read the book, there's actually a Harvard Business Review article that's about 12 pages long that summarizes it. But I would say it's an essential thing for anybody who's thinking about, seriously pursuing a venture and recruiting founders.
If I can add to that, there's an even easier way to know if your founder is committed or not. You know what the difference is between being involved and being committed?
I love it.
It's like when you're having scrambled eggs with bacon in the morning.
Yep.
The chicken is involved. The pig is committed.
Yeah, exactly. I love it, Paris.
Is your co-founder a pig? Forget all these books. Just ask yourself, is your co-founder a pig?
Yeah. But in this case, to be a pig is a good thing, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
I actually spent the last half hour trying to figure that out with one of my partners.
Yeah.
Long discussion, but are you a pig? I didn't put it that way.
Yeah.
That's essentially what you want to find out.
Yeah.
Any more questions, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, we have it in the back here.
I wanted to ask, as a young entrepreneur, how can you transmit trust into investors and other people that might be interested in your business? Because sometimes,
yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Sometimes I feel like I struggle with people not taking me too seriously because of my age or my previous experience, not having any formal jobs except internships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have anything?
Well, listen, unfortunately in Europe, the venture capital community, the investor community is a lot more conservative, right? So you're living in a different ecosystem, right? In Boston or Silicon Valley, age has no bearing, right? Nobody gives a damn about how old you are, okay? So you do have that extra challenge. But if we move beyond that, any rational investor is going to judge you by your actions. So they're not going to invest in you because you have a great handshake or you have a great idea. They're going to only invest in you if you have a validated business model, right? If you've begun to demonstrate some level of real traction with your company. If you've been able to solve a real problem for a specific set of users. And if you've done it in a way that those users are willing to get on the telephone or whatever it is these days, on a Zoom session and tell the investor that, this young man or this team, they are rocking it. Okay. They have figured out something that we've been trying to get done for a long time. And, they know what they're doing. Okay. That's the way that you get investors to trust you because you've demonstrated your competence. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're
And just
welcome.
to add, the reason why VCs are different for the most part in the US, especially in Silicon Valley and in Europe, is because where do you think the average VC partner comes from in Europe? What do you think their job was before?
I can see.
Finance.
Banking. And so what do bankers look at? Numbers and gray hair. So that's why it's a struggle sometimes, you know? All right, any other question? All right, let's give a big hand to Mike.
All right, thank you, everyone. Listen, I want you all to know how lucky you are to have professors like Iklok in Paris. You couldn't have two better men guiding you through the startup journey. And it's always an honor to collaborate with both of them. So thank you all. A pleasure to meet you today, and I wish you an incredible success over the next 5 days. Take care now.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.